You're throwing away 6 years of medical education for what? A computer program nobody needs." My father's voice echoed through our family home in Portland as he paced the kitchen, his half-eaten Sunday dinner forgotten. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The disappointment in his eyes was something I'd grown familiar with over the years, but this time hit differently. I was 28 years old, had just walked away from a promising residency at Oregon Medical Center, and had invested my entire savings into a startup that existed solely on my laptop and in my dreams. My name is Daniel Chen, and 3 years ago I made the most terrifying decision of my life, choosing to believe in myself when nobody else would. I still remember the exact moment the idea came to me. It was during my second year of residency, around 3 a.m. on a 36-hour shift. I was updating patient charts, fighting to keep my eyes open, when Mrs. Abernathy's file wouldn't load. For the third time that week, the hospital's archaic software had crashed, potentially putting patients at risk. As I waited for the IT department to restart the system, I sketched out what would eventually become MedLink on the back of a prescription pad, a secure, intuitive interface that could integrate with existing hospital infrastructure while providing real-time updates across departments. "It needs to be intuitive enough for an exhausted doctor to use at 3 a.m., I explained to my colleague Emma during lunch the next day, "and secure enough to handle sensitive patient data." "Sounds amazing," she said, picking at her salad. "But aren't there already systems that do this?" "Not like this," I insisted, pulling out my sketch. "Everything on the market is clunky, designed by programmers who've never worked a hospital floor. This would be different, designed by doctors, for doctors." Emma smiled sympathetically. "Well, if anyone could build it, it would be you. But when would you have time? We barely sleep as it is." She had a point. Before medical school, I'd completed a computer science degree at MIT. My father had considered it a waste of time, merely a stepping stone to a real profession like medicine. He'd never understood my passion for coding, viewing it as a hobby at best, a distraction at worst. Still, those skills had never left me, and I often found myself mentally redesigning the hospital systems during long nights on call. For 6 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was Dr. Chen, dedicated resident. By night, I coded until my vision blurred, building a prototype of MedLink that grew more promising with each iteration. The few colleagues I showed it to were impressed but skeptical. "Hospitals take forever to adopt new technology," they warned, "and the regulatory hurdles alone." Then came the night that changed everything. A medication error nearly cost a patient his life, not because of doctor negligence, but because of a system failure that didn't flag a potentially dangerous interaction. The patient recovered, but I couldn't shake the knowledge that my program would have prevented it. That same week, my father called to congratulate me on being halfway through my residency. "Just 2 more years," he said proudly. "Then you'll be a real doctor, making a real difference." I stared at my computer screen, at the code that could potentially save countless lives, and made my decision. The next morning, I walked into my program director's office and resigned from my residency. The conversation with my father went exactly as expected. "Temporary insanity," he called it, "a midlife crisis at 28. My mother sat silently at the kitchen table, worry creasing her forehead as my father listed all the ways I was ruining my life. He'd grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Chicago, the son of Chinese immigrants who sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. He'd become a respected cardiologist through sheer determination, and he'd raised me with the expectation that I would follow a similar path, preferably with fewer obstacles, thanks to his hard work. I didn't pay for medical school, so you could play with computers, he said, his voice rising. Every Chen for 3 generations has been a doctor. This isn't just about you. This is about saving lives, I countered. More lives than I could ever save, as one doctor in one hospital. He shook his head. Software doesn't save lives, Daniel. Doctors do. I moved out of my apartment near the hospital that week, unable to afford the rent without my residence salary. A small studio in southeast Portland became both my home and MedLink's first official headquarters. I survived on instant ramen and coffee, pouring every dollar into development. My savings dwindled alarmingly fast. Server costs, security consultations, legal fees for privacy compliance. The prototype evolved into a working product, but without connections in the healthcare technology industry, I struggled to get meetings with potential investors. 3 months after leaving medicine, I hit rock bottom. My bank account held less than $800, rent was due in a week, and I'd been rejected by 14 venture capital firms. Most didn't even bother to respond to my emails. The few who granted me meetings seemed more interested in my abandonment of medicine than in the potential of MedLink. Fascinating personal story, one investor said, but healthcare software is a crowded space with high barriers to entry. That night, I sat on my futon, surrounded by empty energy drink cans, seriously considering my father's standing offer to help me get my residency position back. Everyone makes mistakes, he'd said the last time we spoke. It's not too late to fix this one. The next morning, my laptop chimed with an email from a small angel investor group called Horizon Ventures. They'd heard about MedLink through a former classmate who now worked in healthcare technology. Your perspective as a physician developer is intriguing, the email read. We'd like to discuss potential seed funding. The meeting was set for the following week at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. I spent every waking hour refining my pitch, desperate not to squander what felt like my last chance. When the day arrived, I couldn't afford to have my suit dry cleaned, so I ironed it myself, burning my thumb in the process. I arrived an hour early, nervously reviewing my presentation while nursing the cheapest coffee on the menu. Jason Kim from Horizon Ventures arrived exactly on time, younger than I expected and refreshingly straightforward. "Show me what you've built," he said, skipping the small talk. I pulled out my laptop and walked him through MedLink, explaining each feature and the problems it solved. He asked sharp, technical questions that indicated he'd done his homework on healthcare systems. After an hour, he closed my laptop. "The healthcare industry is notoriously resistant to change," he said. My heart sank, preparing for another rejection. But that's exactly why disruption is so valuable when it finally happens. He slid a folder across the table. "We're prepared to offer $300,000 in seed funding for 20% equity." I stared at the number on the term sheet, unable to process what was happening. It wasn't a fortune in the tech world, but it was enough to keep MedLink alive, enough to prove the concept could work. Why? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I finally managed to ask, "Why take a chance on me when bigger firms wouldn't?" Jason smiled. "Because you understand the problem from the inside, and because you were willing to walk away from a sure thing to solve it. That's the kind of founder we bet on." I signed the papers that afternoon. That night I called my father to share the news, hoping he might finally see the potential in what I was building. "That's less than 2 years' salary as a doctor," was his only comment. "And now you've sold off part of your company." The seed round from Horizon kept MedLink operational for another 11 months. I hired 2 developers, Raj, a back-end specialist who'd previously worked at Microsoft, and Lena, a UX designer who'd helped build interfaces for medical devices. We moved into a small office above a Thai restaurant in Portland's Pearl District, the perpetual smell of curry becoming the unofficial scent of our startup. Progress came in frustrating bursts, weeks of breakthroughs followed by technical roadblocks that seemed insurmountable. The complexity of creating a system that could integrate with existing healthcare infrastructure while maintaining HIPAA compliance and user-friendliness pushed all of us to our limits. There were nights when I slept under my desk rather than waste time commuting home, nights when I questioned every decision that had led me to this point. 6 months in, we secured our first beta testing agreement with Westside Community Hospital, a small facility outside Portland. The implementation was rocky: staff resistance, compatibility issues with their legacy systems, endless bug fixes. I practically lived at the hospital for 3 weeks, personally training nurses and doctors, gathering feedback, and making real-time adjustments. "It's actually intuitive," remarked Dr. Loretta James, the head of emergency medicine, after her third shift using MedLink. "For once, I don't feel like I'm fighting with the software to do my job." Small victories like this kept us going, but our runway was shortening rapidly. We needed another funding round or our first paying clients, preferably both. Jason from Horizon made introductions to larger investors, but the responses were lukewarm. They wanted to see more market validation before committing. My relationship with my father deteriorated further during this period. Our conversations became infrequent and strained. During a rare family dinner, he referred to my company as my computer hobby and asked if I'd considered applying for pharmaceutical sales positions as a way to use my medical background productively. I left before dessert was served. 10 months after our seed round, with less than 4 weeks of operating capital remaining, we hit a turning point. Westside Hospital's quarterly safety report showed a 26% reduction in medication errors and a 17% decrease in chart documentation time since implementing MedLink. The hospital administrator called personally to discuss converting from a free beta to a paid contract. "We've tried systems that cost 10 times more and delivered half the results," she said. "What would it take to roll this out permanently, across all departments?" That first contract saved us from insolvency, providing enough revenue to extend our runway by 3 months. More importantly, it gave us a compelling case study. 2 more small hospitals signed on after hearing about Westside's results, creating a small but steady revenue stream. Our breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Dr. Emma Wong, my former colleague from residency, had taken a position at Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the most prestigious medical institutions in the country. She remembered my prototype and reached out after experiencing frustration with their current system. "Everyone here hates the software we use," she said during a late-night call. "I told my department head about MedLink. He wants a demo." I emptied our company bank account to fly to Boston, knowing this opportunity could make or break us. The demo was scheduled for a 1-hour slot with the hospital's technology committee, a notoriously critical group of physicians and administrators. They peppered me with questions, deliberately tried to crash the system, and scrutinized our security protocols. The meeting extended to 3 hours. "You built this after leaving a medical residency?" asked Dr. Richardson, the silver-haired committee chair, peering at me over his glasses. "Yes, sir. I left specifically to develop it." He exchanged glances. "With the hospital's CIO. Bold move." 2 weeks later, Massachusetts General Hospital signed a contract for a 6-month pilot program in 3 departments. The press release caught the attention of healthcare technology journalists, resulting in our first significant media coverage. "Physician-founded startup challenges healthcare software giants," read one headline. Another proclaimed, "MedLink, the software that thinks like a doctor." With this validation, our next funding round came together quickly. Horizon Ventures led again, joined by two larger firms specializing in healthcare technology. We raised $8 million at a valuation that seemed unreal to me. On paper, at least, my stake in MedLink was now worth several times what I would have earned completing my medical residency. I sent my parents a link to the TechCrunch article about our funding round. My mother called to congratulate me. My father didn't mention it during our next conversation, instead asking if I'd seen an article about physician burnout and career satisfaction. The next 18 months were a blur of growth, challenges and perpetual motion. We expanded to 15 employees, moved to a proper office, and implemented MedLink in 17 hospitals across 6 states. Each implementation taught us more about the unique needs of different medical environments. We continuously refined the product, adding features requested by users on the front lines. Not everything went smoothly. A server outage during an update left 3 hospitals temporarily unable to access patient records, forcing them to revert to paper systems for 6 hours. A competing company filed a patent infringement claim that, while eventually dismissed, drained resources and attention. 2 key employees left for larger companies, attracted by stability and higher salaries than we could offer. Through it all, the core promise of MedLink, software that thought like a doctor rather than a programmer, continued to resonate. Our user satisfaction scores consistently outranked industry leaders. Hospitals reported measurable improvements in efficiency and safety metrics after implementation. Then came the email that changed everything. Lena burst into my office, her usual composure shattered by excitement. "Apple's healthcare division wants a meeting," she blurted out, waving her phone. "Next week in Cupertino." I stared at her, certain she was joking. "Apple? As in Apple? She nodded vigorously. "They're expanding their healthcare technology initiatives, and MedLink caught their attention. This is real, Daniel." The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. We spent the weekend preparing obsessively, debating whether this was a partnership discussion, an investment opportunity, or something else entirely. I barely slept the night before, running through scenarios and rehearsing responses to potential questions. Apple's campus was everything the tech world described, impressively designed, meticulously maintained, radiating innovation and success. We were escorted to a conference room where 5 Apple executives waited, including their chief medical officer, a former hospital system CEO. "MedLink has created something unique in the healthcare space," began Sarah Martinez, VP of Strategic Initiatives. "User-centric design that actually understands clinical workflows, built by someone who's lived those workflows. We've been watching your progress with interest." For 2 hours, we discussed MedLink's technology, our market penetration, and our vision for the future. They asked pointed questions about our scalability, security architecture, and long-term roadmap. I answered honestly, including acknowledging our limitations as a small company with constrained resources. "What would you do differently with unlimited resources?" asked James Chen, no relation, their head of healthcare product development. I didn't hesitate. "Revolutionize patient data interoperability between institutions. Right now, healthcare information is trapped in silos. With the right infrastructure and industry leverage, we could create seamless information flow that follows patients wherever they go while maintaining privacy and security." The executives exchanged glances. James nodded slightly to Sarah, who turned to me with a carefully neutral expression. "We're interested in acquiring MedLink," she said directly. "Your technology and team would become part of Apple's healthcare initiative. We believe your approach to clinical workflow design aligns perfectly with our vision for the future of healthcare technology." I struggled to maintain my composure. "I appreciate your interest. We'd need to understand the details, of course." Of course, Sarah smiled. Our initial offer is $32 million with earn-out provisions that could add another $8 million based on integration milestones. The number hit me like a physical force. $40 million for a company I'd started in a studio apartment while eating ramen. A company my father had called a waste of education and potential. We spent the next 3 weeks in intense negotiations, consulting with lawyers and advisors far more experienced in acquisition deals than we were. The final agreement settled at $38 million up front, with $12 million in potential earnouts. The entire team would join Apple's healthcare division, with guaranteed positions for at least 2 years. MedLink would be integrated into Apple's broader healthcare strategy, with the potential to reach far more hospitals than we could have approached independently. The night before the final signing, I sat alone in my apartment, trying to process the journey. 3 years earlier, I'd walked away from medicine, disappointing my family and risking financial ruin. Tomorrow, I would become a multimillionaire, joining one of the world's most innovative companies to continue the mission I'd believed in when no one else did. I called my parents. My mother answered, and I asked if they were both home. "Yes, your father just got back from the hospital. Should I put you on speaker?" I took a deep breath. "I have some news. Apple is acquiring MedLink. The deal finalizes tomorrow." There was a brief silence. "Apple?" my father finally said. "The iPhone company?" "Yes. They want to integrate our software into their healthcare initiatives." I paused. "The acquisition is for $38 million, plus potential additional payments based on performance." Another silence, longer this time. I could picture my father's face, struggling to reconcile his understanding of my career choices with this new reality. $38 million, he repeated quietly. "Our investors get their percentage, and the amount is split among the founding team, but yes, it's real." My voice cracked slightly. "I didn't waste my education, Dad. I used it differently than you expected." My mother spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. "We're so proud of you, Daniel. So proud." Then, finally, my father cleared his throat. I was wrong," he said, each word seemingly difficult to form. "I didn't understand what you were building. I couldn't see it. Coming from my father, this was the equivalent of a tearful apology and enthusiastic embrace. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." "Will you still be helping patients?" he asked, the doctor in him still concerned with his core value. "More than ever," I told him. "Instead of hundreds of patients in one hospital, we'll potentially reach millions across thousands of hospitals." The signing ceremony the next day was surprisingly low-key. A conference room at our lawyers' offices, a stack of documents, and handshakes with Apple executives. Just like that, MedLink became part of something much larger, and I became the entrepreneur who'd sold a healthcare startup to Apple instead of the doctor who'd abandoned his residency. The story made the rounds in tech and healthcare publications. Former investors and VCs who had declined to fund us suddenly found time in their schedules for coffee meetings. My inbox filled with congratulatory messages from medical school classmates, many expressing a new interest in technology entrepreneurship. 2 weeks after the acquisition, I flew home to have dinner with my parents. My father met me at the door, looking somehow both older and energized. He embraced me, a rare demonstration of physical affection, before stepping back to study my face. "You look tired," he said, the doctor's assessment automatic. "Good tired," I assured him. During dinner, my father surprised me by asking detailed questions about MedLink's functionality and our integration plans with Apple. He listened attentively to my explanations, nodding with genuine interest. As my mother cleared the plates, he disappeared into his study, returning with a yellowed newspaper clipping. "I found this when cleaning out some old files," he said, handing it to me. It was an article from my hometown newspaper featuring a 12-year-old me at a regional science fair. I'd created a primitive program that used decision trees to suggest basic medical diagnoses based on symptoms. The headline read, "Local student combines medicine and computing at science fair." "You've been building this longer than either of us realized," my father said quietly. The following Monday, I started my new position at Apple's healthcare division. My office overlooked the spacious campus, a far cry from the tiny studio where MedLink began. On my desk sat a framed copy of that science fair article sent by my father with a note that simply read, "Always proud of you, Dad." 3 years after walking away from medicine, I found myself leading a team developing technology that would eventually touch more patients than I could have seen in several lifetimes as a practicing physician. MedLink's integration with Apple's ecosystem accelerated our reach exponentially, bringing our intuitive interface and safety features to hospitals that might never have considered a solution from a small startup. The journey taught me something essential about blazing your own path. Sometimes the people who love you most will understand your vision least, not because they don't believe in you, but because they can't see what you see. Innovation requires the courage to move forward when the only person who fully believes is yourself. Today, the technology we built helps prevent medication errors in over 400 hospitals worldwide. Each time I visit a medical center and see doctors and nurses using our system, now evolved and improved by Apple's resources, I'm reminded that I didn't abandon medicine after all. I just found a different way to heal. If you're standing at your own crossroads, weighing security against possibility, remember that sometimes the greatest risk is never taking one at all. The path that appears to lead away from your goals might actually be taking you toward their fulfillment in ways you cannot yet imagine. This isn't just my story. It's a reminder that your vision matters, especially when others can't see it. Because sometimes the ideas that face the most resistance become the innovations that change everything. Those first 6 months after leaving my residency were the loneliest of my life. There's something particularly isolating about disappointing the people who raised you, watching their faces shift from pride to confusion to thinly veiled pity. My father's disappointment was vocal and constant, but my mother's quiet concern somehow cut deeper. "I just want you to be happy," she would say during our weekly calls, her voice carefully neutral, "and secure." That word, secure, carried the weight of immigrant parents who had known scarcity. In their world, a doctor's career was the pinnacle of success and stability. Walking away from it wasn't just a career change, it was rejecting generational wisdom. The tiny studio apartment I'd rented in southeast Portland became both sanctuary and prison. Code flowed from my fingers for 14, sometimes 16 hours a day. When I wasn't coding, I was sketching user interfaces on graph paper, researching HIPAA compliance regulations, or writing business plans that seemed increasingly fantastical as my savings dwindled. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd left medicine, partly because of the brutal hours, only to work even longer days, with no guarantee of success. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I survived on a student's diet of instant ramen, coffee, and determination. The weight dropped off my frame, my clothes hung loose. When I video-called my parents, I wore bulkier sweaters to hide how thin I'd become. This physical transformation reflected my financial reality. By month 4, my bank account had dwindled to dangerous levels. Each morning, I checked my balance with growing dread, calculating and recalculating how many weeks remained before complete insolvency. Emma, my former colleague from residency, was one of the few people who didn't treat me like I'd lost my mind. She visited my apartment on a rare day off, eyebrows raising as she took in the constellation of post-it notes covering my walls and the makeshift standing desk constructed from milk crates and a wooden board. "So this is the global headquarters of MedLink," she teased, setting down a grocery bag filled with actual vegetables and homemade lasagna. Somehow, I imagined more. Windows. I managed a tired smile, suddenly aware of how long it had been since I'd had a visitor. The minimalist aesthetic keeps overhead low. She peered over my shoulder at the lines of code on my screen. "Is that the medication cross-check module you were talking about?" I nodded, surprised she remembered. "It'll alert doctors to potential interactions before they even finish writing the prescription. Not just the obvious ones that existing systems catch. It uses machine learning to identify patterns from adverse event reports across hospitals." Emma's expression grew serious. "That would have saved Mrs. Richardson last month." What happened? Rare interaction between her arthritis medication and a new antibiotic. The computer showed no warnings, but she ended up in kidney failure. We caught it in time, but barely. She shook her head. "When are you going to get this in front of actual hospitals?" I gestured to my laptop. "When it's ready, when it's perfect." "Daniel," she said gently, "perfect is the enemy of good. And good software that exists is infinitely better than perfect software that doesn't." Those words haunted me for days afterward. I'd been so focused on building a flawless system that I'd lost sight of the immediate good an early version could do. The next morning, I forced myself to make a list of essential features versus nice-to-haves. If I focused only on the core functionality, medication safety, intuitive charting, and basic interdepartmental communication, I could have a viable product within weeks, not months. With renewed focus, I refined my pitch and began cold calling. Venture capital firms specializing in healthcare technology. The rejections accumulated with depressing predictability. Most didn't even grant me a meeting. Those who did seemed more interested in my decision to leave medicine than in the software itself. "Fascinating career pivot," said one investor at Redwood Ventures, leaning back in his ergonomic chair after my demonstration. "But healthcare is notoriously resistant to new technology. The sales cycles are brutal, 12 to 18 months minimum. Do you have the runway for that?" I thought about my dwindling bank account. "With the right investment partner, yes," he smiled thinly. "We typically like to see market validation before committing. Come back when you have your first paying customer." It was a familiar catch-22. I needed investment to refine the product enough to secure customers, but needed customers to attract investment. After 14 similar meetings, my confidence began to erode. The voice in my head, which sounded suspiciously like my father's, grew louder. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should swallow my pride and beg for my residency position back. The lowest point came during a particularly difficult week in month 5. My laptop, the literal lifeline of my business, began showing signs of imminent hard drive failure. The estimate for data recovery and a replacement was nearly $2,000, money I simply didn't have. That same day, my landlord slipped a notice under my door, reminding me that rent would increase by $200 at the renewal of my lease. To cap it all, my father called to tell me about a former classmate who had just accepted a prestigious fellowship at Johns Hopkins. "Michael was always a step behind you in medical school," he said, his implication clear. "Now he's building a remarkable career while you—" He trailed off, the silence more damning than any criticism. That night I sat on my futon in the dark, a half-eaten cup of ramen growing cold beside me. For the first time since leaving medicine I cried, not delicate tears, but harsh, body-shaking sobs that felt ripped from some primal place. It wasn't just about the money or the setbacks or even my father's disappointment. It was the possibility that I had walked away from a guaranteed path to make a difference, only to fail at creating an alternative one. When the storm passed, I wiped my face and opened my laptop, wincing at the concerning click it made on startup. Instead of returning to coding, I navigated to my email and began drafting a message to my former program director. It would be humiliating to ask for my position back, but pride seemed an increasingly unaffordable luxury. I had written 3 sentences when my phone rang, an unknown number with a Seattle area code. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another collection call for the previous tenant. Some impulse made me pick up. Is this Daniel Chen, the Daniel Chen who developed MedLink? The voice belonged to a woman, professional, but with an undercurrent of enthusiasm. Yes, I said cautiously. Who's asking? My name is Vanessa Wilson. I'm with Cascade Health Partners in Seattle. Your former colleague Emma Wong shared your prototype demonstration video with our Chief Medical Information Officer. We'd like to discuss potential implementation at our community hospitals. I sat up straight, heart suddenly pounding. You've seen the demo. We've watched it 17 times, she said with a small laugh. Our entire technology committee is impressed, particularly with the medication safety features. We've been searching for alternatives to our current system for months. My mind raced, trying to formulate a professional response while suppressing the urge to shout with relief. I'd be happy to schedule a full demonstration at your convenience. Excellent. How does next Thursday work? We can fly you up to Seattle. After confirming the details, I hung up and stared at my phone in disbelief. Then I looked at the half-written email to my former program director, deleted it, and returned to my code with renewed determination. One interested hospital didn't guarantee success, but it was the first real validation from someone other than myself that MedLink had potential. The meeting in Seattle exceeded my wildest expectations. Cascade Health Partners operated 5 community hospitals across Washington state, all struggling with outdated technology. Their medical staff had threatened rebellion if forced to continue with their current system for another year. Show us what you've built, said Dr. Howard Reinhard, their silver-haired CMIO, after minimal small talk. For 2 hours, I demonstrated MedLink's features, noting their reactions to each module. The physicians in the room leaned forward during the medication safety demonstration, exchanging meaningful glances when I showed how the system would have flagged the exact interaction that had harmed their patient the previous month. You built this yourself? Asked Dr. Reinhard, skepticism evident in his tone. Yes, though I'll need to expand the team for full implementation and support, I answered honestly. He nodded slowly. And you left a medical residency to develop this? I left medicine to improve it, I corrected gently. One doctor can help thousands of patients in a career. The right software can help millions. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or at least reassessment. We've seen demonstrations from the major healthcare IT vendors. Beautiful presentations from teams of salespeople showing systems built by programmers who've never set foot in a hospital. This is different. The meeting concluded with a handshake and a promise to continue discussions. On the flight back to Portland, I allowed myself a moment of cautious optimism. It wasn't a contract yet, but it was interest. Genuine interest from actual healthcare providers who recognized the value MedLink could bring. 2 days later, Vanessa called again. The committee was impressed, she began, and my heart soared momentarily before she continued. But they have concerns about implementation and support. You're essentially a one-person operation, correct? My optimism deflated. Currently, yes, but with appropriate funding. That's the challenge, she interrupted gently. The committee is interested in your technology but hesitant about the business risk. We need to know MedLink will exist 6 months from now before we can commit to implementation. I swallowed hard. What would make the committee comfortable moving forward? Investment backing, a team, evidence that MedLink is a sustainable business, not just brilliant software. Her tone softened. For what it's worth, I'm advocating for you. The doctors who saw your demo are as well. We just need to convince the administrative side. After hanging up, I paced my small apartment, frustration building. Another catch-22. Cascade wanted evidence of stability before becoming a customer, but customers were exactly what would provide that stability. I needed investment, but investors wanted to see customers first. The solution hit me around midnight. I didn't need to convince traditional venture capitalists. I needed to find someone who understood healthcare, who could see MedLink's potential through a clinician's eyes. I spent the night researching angel investors with medical backgrounds, compiling a list of possibilities. By morning, I had identified 3 promising prospects in the Pacific Northwest. Jason Kim from Horizon Ventures responded to my cold email within hours. A former hospital administrator turned healthcare technology investor, he represented exactly the bridge I needed between the clinical and business worlds. His message was refreshingly direct. Intrigued by your background and approach, free for coffee tomorrow. We met at a quiet cafe near Portland's waterfront. Jason was younger than I expected, barely into his 40s, with an intensity that manifested in rapid-fire questions about MedLink's architecture, my vision for implementation, and the specific pain points it addressed for physicians. The biggest complaint I heard from doctors when I ran Westview Hospital was that technology slowed them down, he said, stirring his Americano. Every system promised efficiency, but delivered the opposite. They spent more time fighting with computers than treating patients. I nodded emphatically. That's exactly why I built MedLink from a physician's perspective. The interface follows clinical thought patterns, not programmer logic. Most systems force doctors to adapt to the software. MedLink adapts to the doctor. For the next hour, we discussed healthcare technology's failures and potential. Jason asked pointed questions about scalability, security, and competitive differentiation. But unlike previous investors, he understood the answers without needing healthcare IT 101. As our meeting concluded, he leaned back in his chair. I'll be blunt. Your business plan needs work. Your go-to-market strategy is underdeveloped, but your product... He paused. Your product solves real problems that no one else is addressing effectively. My heart raced. And I think Horizon might be interested in a seed investment. I'll need to bring you in to pitch to my partners, but I'm willing to champion this. He named a figure, $300,000 for a 20% equity stake. It wasn't the millions that popular startups raised in Silicon Valley, but it was oxygen for a company and a founder on the verge of suffocation. The investment would provide runway to hire essential team members, refine the product, and hopefully convert Cascade's interest into a signed contract. I felt a lump forming in my throat and fought to maintain professional composure. That sounds like a reasonable starting point for discussion. Jason smiled, seeing through my attempted nonchalance. This is the part where most founders try to negotiate me up on the spot. You're either very confident or very desperate. A bit of both, I admitted with a rueful smile. 2 weeks and several additional meetings later, I signed the term sheet. With Horizon Ventures, the investment wasn't life-changing money, but it represented something far more valuable than the dollar amount: external validation. Someone else believed in MedLink enough to put real capital behind it. That night, I called my parents to share the news, hoping for enthusiasm, or at least understanding. My mother answered with her usual warmth, then called for my father to pick up the extension. I've secured investment for MedLink, I said, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. $300,000 in seed funding from a healthcare-focused venture firm. My mother made appropriate sounds of congratulation, but my father remained silent for several beats too long. "That's what, about 2 years' salary as a senior resident," he finally said. "And you've given up ownership of your company for it?" The balloon of my excitement deflated instantly. "It's a standard arrangement for seed funding, Dad. 20% equity for capital that will help build the business." He said, the sound conveying volumes of skepticism. "Well, I suppose it's better than burning through the rest of your savings. How long will this money last?" "About 8 months, if I'm careful. By then, we should have our first paying customers and be positioned for a larger funding round." "Should," he repeated, emphasizing the uncertainty. "And if you don't?" My mother intervened. "Your father is just concerned, Daniel. We both want you to succeed." I ended the call shortly after, trying not to let my father's reaction diminish what should have been a celebrated milestone. Looking around my sparse apartment, I made a decision: no more living like a starving student. The next day, I signed a lease on a small but professional office space in Portland's Pearl District and began recruiting a skeleton crew to help build MedLink into a real company. Raj Patel, a back-end developer with healthcare experience, was my first hire. He'd worked at one of the major electronic health record companies and left disillusioned by their resistance to innovation. They were more concerned with billing features than clinical usability, he explained during his interview. "I'd rather build something doctors don't hate using." Lena Rodriguez joined next as our UX designer. With a background in cognitive psychology and human-computer interaction, she transformed MedLink's functional but basic interface into something intuitive and visually coherent. "Healthcare software doesn't have to be ugly to be effective," she insisted, showing me redesigns that preserved functionality while enhancing usability. With a real team and office, MedLink began to feel less like a desperate gamble and more like a legitimate business. I updated Vanessa at Cascade Health Partners on our progress, emphasizing the investment and growing team. Her response was cautiously positive. They were still interested, but wanted to see the next iteration before committing. We worked furiously to refine the product, addressing Cascade's specific concerns and enhancing core features. Raj rebuilt the back end for better scalability. Lena reimagined the user experience from admission to discharge. I focused on the clinical logic that set MedLink apart, the patterns of thinking unique to healthcare providers that no Silicon Valley programmer could intuit without medical training. 2 months after securing funding, we invited Cascade's technology committee to Portland for a comprehensive demonstration of the enhanced system. The difference between this presentation and my solo effort in Seattle was striking. A professional office, a cohesive team, and software that had evolved from promising to compelling. Dr. Reinhard remained our toughest critic, questioning every feature and workflow. "Show me how this works for a complex patient," he challenged. "Elderly, multiple chronic conditions, medication allergies, recent hospitalization at a different facility." I talked through the scenario step by step, demonstrating how MedLink would identify potential issues, streamline information sharing, and support clinical decision-making. When I finished, the room was silent. Dr. Reinhard glanced at his colleagues before turning back to me. "We'd like to move forward with a pilot implementation at Northlake Community Hospital. 3 departments, 6-month trial, with an option to expand to our other facilities if successful." The wave of relief that washed over me was almost physical. I maintained a professional demeanor as we discussed implementation timelines and contract details, but inside I was euphoric. Our first real customer, the market validation we desperately needed. That evening, after the Cascade team departed, the three of us sat in our small conference room, sharing a bottle of champagne Lena had brought just in case. To healthcare software that doesn't suck, Raj toasted, raising his paper cup. To a doctor who learned to code, added Lena. I smiled, exhausted but satisfied. To the beginning of something that matters. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I allowed myself a moment of vindication. The path had been lonelier and more difficult than I had imagined when leaving my residency, but this milestone validated the risk. MedLink wasn't just my desperate attempt to avoid admitting a mistake. It was becoming a real solution to real problems faced by healthcare providers and patients. I called Emma to share the news, knowing she would understand its significance better than anyone. They're actually implementing it? She asked, excitement evident in her voice. A real hospital with real patients? Pilot program at North Lake. Starting next month, I confirmed. If it goes well, they'll roll it out to their other hospitals. Daniel, that's incredible! Her enthusiasm was a balm after my father's tepid response. You know what this means, right? It's actually happening. You were right. Those 3 words, you were right, carried immense weight. For months I'd questioned my decision, daily, wondering if I'd sacrificed a stable career for an impossible dream. This first customer didn't guarantee ultimate success, but it proved that MedLink wasn't just a theoretical solution. It was a product actual healthcare providers valued enough to purchase. As implementation plans progressed, the reality of delivering on our promises brought new challenges. Our small team worked around the clock preparing for deployment at North Lake. Every feature needed testing, every workflow required documentation, every potential scenario demanded consideration. The stakes were enormous. This wasn't a beta test among friends, but a system that would impact actual patient care. The night before our implementation team departed for North Lake, I received an unexpected call from my father. I saw the announcement about your contract with Cascade Health Partners, he said, without preamble. One of my colleagues forwarded the press release. I hadn't realized he paid attention to healthcare technology news. Yes, it's a significant milestone for us. Implementation begins next week? Tomorrow, actually. I'm flying to Seattle in the morning. There was a pause before he continued. This system of yours, MedLink, you truly believe it will improve patient care? The question surprised me. It was the first time he'd engaged with the actual purpose of my work, rather than focusing on what I'd given up to pursue it. I know it will, I answered with quiet conviction. That's why I left medicine to build it. Another pause, longer. This time, be careful then. When you're working with patient safety, there's no room for error. It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but coming from my father, it was something close to acknowledgement. He was engaging with MedLink as a healthcare innovation rather than dismissing it as a foolish detour. For now, that was enough. The morning of the North Lake implementation dawned with a mixture of anticipation and terror. I'd barely slept, my mind racing through scenarios, contingencies, and potential catastrophes. Healthcare software wasn't. Like other technologies, bugs didn't just inconvenience users, they could potentially harm patients. This weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders as I boarded the flight to Seattle, clutching my laptop like a lifeline. Raj and Lena sat across the aisle, reviewing last-minute technical details. We had run countless simulations, tested edge cases, and prepared fallback options, but nothing could fully replicate the chaos of a real hospital environment. North Lake had agreed to deploy MedLink in 3 departments initially: emergency, internal medicine, and pharmacy, with round-the-clock support from our team during the first week. Nervous, Lena asked, noticing my white-knuckled grip on the armrest during takeoff. Terrified, I admitted. What if it crashes during a critical patient situation? What if the interfaces don't work with their legacy systems? What if... Then we fix it, she interrupted calmly. That's the difference between us and the big healthcare IT dinosaurs. We'll be on site, seeing problems firsthand, making adjustments in real time. Raj nodded in agreement. The big companies take months to address critical issues. We can deploy updates within hours. Their confidence steadied me somewhat, but the stakes felt intensely personal. This wasn't just about business success. It was validation of my decision to leave medicine. Proof that I could help more patients through technology than through direct care. Northlake Community Hospital was a modest 220-bed facility serving Seattle's northern suburbs. The exterior projected calm efficiency, but inside revealed the controlled chaos familiar to anyone who has worked in healthcare. Nurses hurried between rooms, physicians dictated notes while walking, and monitors beeped with steady urgency. This was the environment MedLink had been designed for. Not the sterile quiet of a development office, but the messy reality of frontline care. Dr. Reinhard met us in the hospital's small conference room, accompanied by Vanessa Wilson and the IT director, a harried-looking man named Marcus. Fair warning, Dr. Reinhard began without preamble. The staff is skeptical. Our last software transition was a disaster. 3 months of lost productivity, missing data, and workarounds that are still in place 2 years later. We understand, I replied, trying to project confidence. That's why we're approaching this as a partnership, not just a vendor relationship. We'll be on site 24/7 during the initial deployment, and we'll adjust based on real user feedback. Marcus, the IT director, snorted softly. That's what they all say. I pulled out my laptop and opened MedLink. The difference is, we mean it. Let me show you how we've customized the system for Northlake's specific workflows. For the next hour, I demonstrated the implementation plan, including the data migration strategy, training schedule, and phased rollout approach. Unlike most healthcare software companies that followed rigid deployment protocols, regardless of hospital needs, we had designed a flexible implementation specific to Northlake's environment. Dr. Reinhard's expression remained carefully neutral, but I noticed his posture gradually relaxing as the presentation progressed. You've clearly done your homework, he acknowledged, but the proof will be in the actual deployment. That afternoon marked the beginning of the most intense 2 weeks of my life. We started with system setup and data migration, working through the night to transfer patient information from their legacy system to MedLink. Every physician and nurse received personalized training, not in large impersonal groups, but in small sessions tailored to their department's specific needs. I personally led the physician training, drawing on my medical background to frame the software in terms of clinical workflows rather than technical features. This isn't about learning a new system, I explained during each session. It's about having technology finally adapt to how you actually practice medicine. The first day of live deployment tested every contingency we had planned. Minor issues emerged immediately. Pharmacy interfaces timing out, lab results displaying in unexpected formats, login sessions expiring too quickly for busy ED physicians. Our team huddled in a repurposed storage closet we'd claimed as our command center, triaging issues and deploying fixes in real time. The medication verification module is running slow in the ICU, Raj reported, fingers flying across his keyboard. I'm allocating more server resources to address the lag. Lena returned from shadowing nurses on the medical floor. They're struggling with the documentation templates. The fields don't match their mental workflow. I'm redesigning them now for an update tonight. I had just finished troubleshooting an issue with the radiology integration when Dr. Reinhard appeared in the doorway of our makeshift office. His expression was grim, and my stomach dropped. "Problem in the emergency department," he said tersely. "The system isn't displaying medication allergies consistently. Patient nearly received penicillin despite a documented severe allergy." The blood drained from my face. This was exactly the scenario I had feared, a potentially life-threatening error. "How was it caught?" "The nurse recognized the patient from a previous visit," he replied. "Pure luck. If it had been a new nurse or an unfamiliar patient." I grabbed my laptop. "Show me." We rushed to the emergency department, where a visibly frustrated physician was attempting to enter orders for an elderly patient. I asked her to demonstrate the issue, watching intently as she navigated through the patient chart. The allergy section showed no known allergies, despite the patient having multiple allergies documented elsewhere in the record. "I see the problem," I said after observing several patient records. "It's not pulling the historical allergy data from converted records correctly. The information is in the database but not displaying in the interface." Within 20 minutes, Raj had identified the code issue, a formatting discrepancy between how allergies were stored in their old system versus MedLink's database structure. Within an hour, we had deployed a fix and verified its effectiveness across multiple test cases. By evening, we had implemented a temporary safety protocol requiring double verification of allergies until we were confident the issue was fully resolved. Dr. Reinhard observed our response with calculated assessment. "You fixed it quickly," he acknowledged, "but it shouldn't have happened at all." "You're right," I agreed, refusing to make excuses. "We tested extensively with sample data from your system, but this particular formatting issue didn't appear in the test environment. That's on us, and we've implemented additional verification steps to prevent similar issues." Instead of defending our process, I outlined the specific changes we were making to our testing protocols based on what we'd learned. My medical training had taught me that transparency about errors was essential for improvement, a principle I was determined to bring to healthcare technology. That night, our team worked until 3 a.m., implementing fixes and enhancements based on the first day's feedback. I sent emails to each department head detailing the issues we'd identified, the solutions implemented, and our plans for the following day. Transparency would be our competitive advantage against larger companies that hid behind customer service scripts and ticket escalation procedures. By the end of the first week, the acute crisis period had passed. Major issues had been addressed, and minor ones were being systematically resolved. Staff who had approached the new system with open hostility began to show tentative signs of acceptance. Some even offered unexpected praise. "The medication reconciliation module is actually intuitive," commented a veteran internist who had initially been among our harshest critics. "First time in 20 years, I haven't wanted to throw the computer out the window while admitting a patient." These small victories sustained us through the grueling implementation schedule. Our team practically lived at the hospital, working in shifts to provide 24/7 support. I lost track of days, existing in a cycle of troubleshooting, improving, and training that blurred together in an exhausted haze. The turning point came during week 3, when the emergency department experienced a sudden influx of patients from a multi-vehicle accident on the nearby interstate. In the midst of the chaos, Dr. Kepler, the ED director, was using MedLink to manage multiple critical patients simultaneously. I hovered nearby, ready to troubleshoot any issues that might emerge under the stress test of a mass casualty event. But as I watched Dr. Kepler rapidly document injuries, order critical tests, and coordinate with surgery teams, I realized something remarkable. She wasn't fighting with the software. MedLink was functioning as designed, becoming nearly invisible, as it supported her clinical decision-making rather than hindering it. After the crisis had stabilized, Dr. Kepler found me in the hallway. "Your system worked," she said simply. 7 critical patients moving through simultaneously, and the software kept up. She smiled slightly. First time that's ever happened. A word of MedLink's performance during the accident spread throughout the hospital. Staff, who had been reluctant to engage with yet another new system, began approaching us with questions and suggestions. The dynamic shifted from us pushing adoption to users pulling for more features and capabilities. By the end of month 2, usage metrics showed adoption rates significantly higher than industry averages for new implementations. Error rates had declined steadily, and time spent on documentation had decreased by an average of 42 minutes per physician per shift, giving back precious time for direct patient care. Dr. Reinhard invited our team to the monthly Medical Executive Committee meeting to present the preliminary results. Standing before the hospital's physician leaders, I felt a strange blend of pride and humility. These were experienced clinicians who had seen technologies come and go, each promising revolution and usually delivering frustration. Their cautious optimism, as I presented our data, felt more valuable than any venture funding round. The numbers are encouraging, Dr. Reinhard acknowledged after my presentation. But what's more significant is the qualitative feedback. Staff aren't just tolerating the system, they're actually starting to prefer it. The committee voted unanimously to extend the pilot to all remaining departments and begin planning for implementation at their sister hospitals. Cascade Health Partners was officially becoming our first full enterprise customer. That night, our small team celebrated at a restaurant near our hotel, exhausted but exhilarated by the validation of months of work. To MedLink, Raj toasted, raising his glass. From crazy idea to actual working product. To proving everyone wrong, added Lena with a grin. I thought about my father's dismissal of MedLink as a waste of education, of the investors who had declined meetings, of colleagues who had questioned my sanity for leaving medicine. The vindication was sweet, but it also felt strangely hollow. Success wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about creating something genuinely valuable. To making healthcare better, I countered, raising my own glass. One frustrated doctor at a time. We returned to Portland with a signed contract and a formidable list of enhancements requested by Northlake staff. Our successful implementation had not only secured our first major customer, but provided a credible case study to approach other hospital systems. The seed funding that had seemed so precarious now had a pathway to sustainability through actual revenue. The office we returned to barely resembled the sparse space we'd left a month earlier. During our absence, we had hired a small support team to handle customer service and basic troubleshooting. Whiteboards covered with development plans lined the walls, and the kitchen area had been upgraded from a single coffee maker to a respectable break space. Growing from 3 people to 8 brought new challenges. Our informal collaboration methods needed structure. Our ad hoc decision-making required processes. I found myself spending more time on management tasks and less on actual product development, a transition that felt both necessary and uncomfortable. Emma visited our office during a conference trip to Portland, marveling at the transformation from my studio apartment days. "This is an actual company," she observed, watching our team work, "with actual employees and everything." "Sometimes I can't believe it either," I admitted. 6 months ago, this was just code on my laptop and sketches on napkins. She studied me carefully. "How are you handling the CEO role? It's a long way from medical training." The question gave me pause. My medical education had prepared me to be an expert individual contributor, not a team leader. Residency taught hierarchy and clear authority structures, not the collaborative management needed in a startup environment. I was learning leadership through trial and error, making mistakes and adjustments daily. "I'm figuring it out," I said. "Finally." some days better than others. "Have you told your parents about the Cascade contract?" she asked. I shook my head. After my father's dismissive response to our seed funding, I'd been reluctant to share subsequent milestones. Our weekly calls had become perfunctory exchanges of basic updates, carefully avoiding detailed discussions of MedLink's progress. "You should," Emma urged. "This isn't some theoretical concept anymore. You have a working product helping real patients." That evening, I followed her advice and called my parents. My mother answered with her usual warmth, then called my father to join the conversation. I took a deep breath and shared the news about Cascade Health Partners implementing MedLink across their hospital network. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," my mother responded immediately. "Your hard work is paying off." My father remained silent for several moments. "These hospitals," he finally said, "they're actually using your software with patients." "Yes," I confirmed. "The initial implementation at Northlake has been successful enough that they're rolling it out to their other facilities. And it's helping, making things better for the doctors and patients?" The question contained something I hadn't heard before, genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. "It is," I said, proceeding cautiously. "Medication errors are down 26% in departments using MedLink. Documentation time has decreased significantly, giving physicians more time with patients." He said, the sound neither approval nor dismissal. "Send me some information about it. I'd like to understand what you've built." The request stunned me. In the 2 years since I'd left medicine, my father had never expressed interest in understanding MedLink beyond superficial acknowledgement of my career change. His willingness to engage, however tentative, felt like a small but significant breach in the wall of disappointment he'd constructed. The following week, I carefully compiled materials explaining MedLink in terms my father would appreciate: clinical outcomes, patient safety improvements, and physician satisfaction metrics. I included testimonials from doctors at Northlake, particularly the veterans who had initially been skeptical. Rather than emphasizing the technical achievements, I focused on how MedLink was fulfilling the same mission that had drawn me to medicine in the first place: improving patient care. My father never directly acknowledged receiving the materials, but during our next call, he asked specific questions about medication reconciliation and clinical decision support. The questions revealed that he had not only read what I'd sent, but had thought about its implications for his own practice. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was engagement, the first real connection we'd found since I'd left medicine. As MedLink gained traction with Cascade Health Partners, other opportunities began to emerge. A physician from our Northlake implementation mentioned our system to colleagues at a regional medical conference, generating inquiries from several hospital systems. Vanessa Wilson introduced us to their medical equipment vendor, creating partnership possibilities for deeper integration with bedside devices. Our initial success also attracted attention from competitors. 3 months after our Cascade implementation, I received a LinkedIn message from the CEO of Meditech Solutions, one of the established players in healthcare software. He suggested a meeting to explore potential collaboration opportunities, corporate speak for assessing whether to partner with us or neutralize us as a competitive threat. The meeting took place at a high-end Portland restaurant, with the Meditech executive team flying in specifically to meet with us. Their CEO, Richard Blackwell, was polished and professional, complementing our innovative approach while subtly emphasizing their market dominance. "What you've built is impressive," he said after preliminary pleasantries, "particularly for such a small team. Our users have been requesting many of these features for years." "That's exactly why we built MedLink," I replied. "The existing systems weren't addressing clinicians' actual needs." Richard smiled thinly. "Building software is only half the battle. Distribution, compliance, ongoing support. Those are the real challenges for healthcare technology. That's where an established partner could be valuable. The subtext was clear. They were interested in acquiring our technology rather than competing with it. The conversation progressed to subtle inquiries about our client base, development roadmap, and funding situation. All information that would help them value MedLink as an acquisition target or assess us as a competitor. We should explore how Meditech might integrate some of MedLink's innovations, Richard suggested as lunch concluded. Our resources combined with your clinical approach could be powerful. I promised to consider the possibility while remaining non-committal. As our team debriefed afterward, opinions were divided about how to proceed. Their development cycle is notoriously slow, Raj pointed out. Our innovations would get buried in bureaucracy. But their sales reach is enormous, countered our newly hired business development lead. They're in thousands of hospitals worldwide. Lena frowned. The question is whether we want MedLink to exist as features inside their system or as a true alternative to it. The question touched on something fundamental about why I'd created MedLink in the first place. I hadn't left medicine to build incremental improvements to existing systems. I'd envisioned a true paradigm shift in how healthcare technology served clinicians and patients. Being absorbed into a legacy system felt like surrendering that vision before we'd truly tested its potential. We're not ready to have this conversation, I decided. We have one major customer and promising leads. Let's prove our model works at scale before considering partnerships or acquisitions. The team nodded in agreement, though I sensed some disappointment from those who had briefly envisioned early paydays from an acquisition. Building a company was a longer, harder path than selling our technology, but it was the only way to ensure MedLink fulfilled its purpose. The meeting with Meditech, while inconclusive, validated that we were onto something significant. Established players don't court tiny startups unless they represent either valuable opportunities or legitimate threats. Regardless of which category they placed us in, their interest confirmed we were no longer just a former doctor's side project. We were becoming a recognized entity in healthcare technology. This external validation coincided with growing internal challenges. Our rapid expansion from 3 founders to 15 employees strained our informal management approach. Decision-making that had once happened through quick conversations now required structured processes. Technical choices that had been made unilaterally by Raj now needed documentation and justification for a growing engineering team. Most challenging was my own evolution from technical founder to CEO. Hours once spent coding or designing clinical workflows were now consumed by investor relations, recruitment, and strategic planning. I found myself missing the hands-on work that had driven me to create MedLink in the first place. The growth challenges reached a crisis point when we discovered a significant security vulnerability in our most recent update, one that could potentially expose sensitive patient information. The issue was caught internally before affecting any deployed systems, but the close call revealed dangerous gaps in our quality assurance processes. I called an emergency meeting of the entire company, taking full responsibility for the lapse. We've been moving too fast and prioritizing features over fundamentals, I acknowledged. That stops today. For the next month, we halted all new development to overhaul our security protocols, testing procedures, and deployment processes. It was a painful but necessary reset, establishing the foundation for sustainable growth rather than the rush of early-stage development. During this period of internal focus, I received an unexpected call from Dr. James Chen, the Chief Medical Informatics Officer at Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the nation's most prestigious medical institutions. Emma had apparently demonstrated MedLink during a presentation to her colleagues. Your former colleague, Dr. Wong, showed us some impressive capabilities, he said. We're evaluating options to replace our current system and would like to include MedLink in the assessment. The opportunity was both exhilarating and terrifying. Mass General represented the pinnacle of academic medicine, a lighthouse institution whose technology choices influenced hospitals nationwide. Their interest could catapult MedLink from promising startup to legitimate contender, but their evaluation would be rigorous and unforgiving. We'd be honored to participate, I replied, trying to project confidence despite my racing pulse. When would you like to schedule a demonstration? Next month, he said. Our evaluation committee meets quarterly. I should warn you that we're also looking at proposals from all the major vendors. This will be a comprehensive assessment, not just a casual review. After hanging up, I sat in momentary silence, absorbing the magnitude of the opportunity. Mass General wasn't just another potential customer. It represented a chance to validate MedLink at the highest level of healthcare. Success there would open doors throughout the industry. Failure would reinforce the perception that truly innovative healthcare technology could only come from established players. I gathered our leadership team to share the news. This is what we've been working toward, I told them. The chance to prove that a clinician-designed system can outperform corporate software at the highest levels of medicine. The energy in the room shifted from the grinding determination of our security overhaul to focused excitement. This was the opportunity we needed, a chance to demonstrate that our approach to healthcare technology wasn't just different, but fundamentally better. As we began preparing for the Mass General demonstration, I realized how far we had come from my desperate coding sessions in a studio apartment. MedLink had evolved from a personal crusade against broken healthcare technology to a growing company with a genuine chance to transform how medicine was practiced. The path remained uncertain, but for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that leaving my medical residency might prove to be not just defensible, but visionary. The Massachusetts General Hospital opportunity dominated every waking moment in the weeks that followed. Our entire team understood the stakes. This wasn't just another sales pitch, but a potential inflection point for MedLink's future. If one of the world's leading medical institutions chose our software over established competitors, it would send shockwaves through the healthcare technology industry. I assembled a core team for the presentation, myself handling the clinical workflow demonstrations, Raj covering technical architecture questions, Lena presenting the user experience design, and our new head of implementation discussing deployment methodology. We created a custom demonstration environment specifically tailored to Mass General's departments and specialties, populating it with realistic but fictional patient scenarios that would resonate with their evaluation committee. We need to anticipate every possible question, I told the team during our daily preparation sessions. These won't be casual observers. They'll be world-class physicians and technical experts looking for any weakness in our system. The night before our flight to Boston, I received an unexpected call from my father. Our conversations had grown less strained in recent months, but remained largely superficial, carefully avoiding any deep discussion of my career choices. "I heard you're presenting at Mass General tomorrow," he said without preamble. I paused, surprised. "How did you know that?" "Dr. Lawrence Kwan is on their evaluation committee. We trained together at Hopkins." His voice carried a hint of something I couldn't quite identify. Not quite pride, but perhaps respect. He mentioned they were considering new software from a company founded by a physician who left residency. I assumed it was you. The coincidence startled me. Healthcare could be a surprisingly small world, with connections spanning across institutions and decades. "Yes, we're presenting tomorrow. It's a significant opportunity for MedLink," "Lawrence doesn't suffer fools gladly," my father said. "He's brilliant but demanding, extraordinarily detail-oriented." I recognized the information for what it was, not criticism but intelligence, my father providing useful insight in his own way. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll be prepared." There was a moment of silence before he continued. "Daniel, regardless of how tomorrow goes, what you've built appears to have merit. The fact that Mass General is even considering your system says something." The acknowledgement, however qualified, felt monumental coming from him. "That means a lot, Dad. Don't misunderstand," he added quickly. "I still believe you could have made significant contributions as a practicing physician, but perhaps your approach has some validity as well." It wasn't a full endorsement, but from my father it represented a seismic shift. For the first time since leaving medicine, he was acknowledging that my path might have legitimate value, even if it wasn't the one he would have chosen. We landed in Boston the next morning, the early May air crisp with possibility. Massachusetts General Hospital stood imposing and historic against the skyline, its original bullfinch building, dating back to 1811, now surrounded by modern medical towers. Walking through its halls felt like traversing medical history itself. The institution where ether anesthesia was first demonstrated, where countless medical breakthroughs had occurred over 2 centuries. The evaluation committee assembled in a large conference room within the Lunda building. 16 people sat around a U-shaped table, department heads, IT directors, practicing physicians, and administrators. Dr. Lawrence Kwan, my father's former colleague, sat at the center, his expression revealing nothing as we were introduced. "Thank you for including MedLink in your evaluation process," I began. "We understand you're assessing multiple systems, including those from much larger, established companies. We appreciate the opportunity to demonstrate why our approach is fundamentally different. Instead of launching into standard product features, I started with the origin story, my experiences as a resident fighting with poorly designed software, the moment I decided to leave medicine to create something better, and our philosophy of building technology that adapted to healthcare providers rather than forcing providers to adapt to technology." Dr. Kwan leaned forward slightly. "Many of our physicians share your frustrations with current systems. But transitioning a hospital of our complexity involves enormous risk. What makes MedLink worth that risk?" It was the perfect opening question, direct and challenging, but focused on the heart of our value proposition. For the next 3 hours, our team methodically addressed every aspect of that risk equation, demonstrating MedLink's clinical workflows, security architecture, implementation methodology, and outcomes data from our existing deployments. The committee's questions were relentless and technically sophisticated. They presented complex patient scenarios to stress test our system's capabilities, challenged our security assertions with specific vulnerability concerns, and probed our ability to scale from community hospitals to a world-class academic medical center. Dr. Emily Reinhardt, the emergency medicine chair, presented a particularly challenging scenario. "Show me how your system would handle a mass casualty event. Multiple trauma patients arriving simultaneously, limited staff, critical decisions needed immediately." I walked through MedLink's emergency response module, demonstrating how it prioritized critical information during crisis situations and streamlined documentation to maximize clinical time. The system was designed for medicine's hardest moments, not just its routine ones, I explained. When seconds count, software should help, not hinder. By the final hour, the energy in the room had shifted subtly. The initial skepticism remained, but it was now tempered with genuine curiosity. Several committee members exchanged thoughtful glances as we demonstrated capabilities absent from their current system, As we concluded, Dr. Kwan studied me with calculating assessment. "You've built something interesting, Dr. Chen, different from what we've seen from the established vendors. The committee will complete its evaluation process over the next month, comparing all options against our criteria." We left the hospital cautiously optimistic. The presentation had gone as well as we could have hoped, with the committee actively engaged throughout. Whether that engagement would translate to serious consideration remained uncertain, but we had definitively established MedLink as a legitimate contender rather than a token inclusion. "What's your honest assessment?" I asked Raj as our team debriefed in the hotel lounge that evening. He considered the question carefully. They were more impressed than they wanted to show. The technical questions shifted from "prove this works" to "how exactly does this work?" about halfway through. That's usually a positive sign. The physicians on the committee were definitely responding to the clinical workflows, Lena added. You could see it in their body language when we showed the medication reconciliation process. I nodded, allowing myself a moment of qualified hope. Even being considered by an institution of Mass General's caliber represented validation of our approach. Whether we ultimately won the contract or not, we had proven that MedLink belonged in the conversation with healthcare technology's biggest players. Upon returning to Portland, we refocused on our existing customers and developing new prospects. The Mass General decision would take weeks, and obsessing over it wouldn't change the outcome. We continued refining the product based on feedback from Cascade Health Partners, whose implementation had now expanded to all 5 of their hospitals. 3 weeks after our Boston presentation, I received an email from Dr. Kwan requesting a follow-up conference call with Mass General's technical team. The message gave no indication of their leanings, simply stating they had additional questions regarding implementation logistics. The call revealed their serious interest, detailed questions about interface capabilities, training methodologies, and support structures. They requested references from our existing customers and specific documentation regarding our security protocols. These weren't the questions of an organization going through evaluation motions. They were the due diligence of a potential buyer. "They're down to final considerations," our sales director assessed after the call. "Probably us and one of the established players. They wouldn't invest this much time otherwise." The following weeks brought additional requests for information, each more detailed than the last. Our team responded with meticulous documentation, recognizing that every question represented both scrutiny and opportunity. The process consumed significant resources, but the potential reward justified the investment. Finally, 2 months after our initial presentation, Dr. Kwan called personally. "Dr. Chen, after extensive evaluation, Massachusetts General Hospital would like to proceed with a pilot implementation of MedLink in 3 departments: emergency medicine, internal medicine, and neurology." The carefully controlled professionalism I'd maintained throughout the sales process momentarily faltered. "That's extraordinary news, Dr. Kwan. Thank you for your confidence in our solution. To be clear," he continued, "this is a limited initial deployment with specific performance criteria for expansion." The committee had significant debate about selecting a smaller company over established vendors. "Your clinical approach ultimately proved persuasive, but you'll need to deliver on every promise." "We understand completely," I assured him. MedLink was built for exactly this challenge. After ending the call, I stood in my office for several moments, absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. Massachusetts General Hospital, medicine's equivalent of a Fortune 10 company, had chosen our software over industry giants. With decades of history and billions in resources, the validation wasn't just commercial, but deeply personal. Affirmation that leaving medicine to build MedLink had been the right decision. I gathered the entire company in our main conference room to share the news. The eruption of cheers and applause reflected both excitement and vindication. This small team had created something compelling enough to win over one of healthcare's most prestigious institutions. "This is a tremendous opportunity," I cautioned, after the initial celebration subsided, "but also a massive responsibility. Mass General's standards will be even higher than anything we've encountered. We need to deliver a flawless implementation." That evening, I called my parents to share the news. My mother answered and immediately sensed my excitement. "You sound happy, Daniel. Good news. Massachusetts General has chosen MedLink for a pilot implementation," I said, still slightly disbelieving. "They selected us over all the major healthcare IT companies." "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful." Her genuine happiness warmed me. "Your father's just coming in. Robert, pick up the phone. Daniel has news." I heard the click of the extension. "Daniel, what's happening?" "Mass General is implementing MedLink," I repeated. "We won the contract over much larger competitors." There was a moment of silence. "Lawrence Kwan's committee selected your software." He sounded genuinely surprised. "That's significant validation. Lawrence doesn't make decisions like that lightly." "The pilot starts in 3 months," I continued. 3 departments initially, with potential for hospital-wide implementation if the metrics are positive. "Well," my father said, his tone measured, but without the dismissiveness that had characterized earlier conversations, "it seems you're making substantial progress. Congratulations." Coming from him, it felt like high praise. Our relationship remained complicated, but this moment represented a turning point, professional respect beginning to bridge the gap his disappointment had created. The Mass General contract fundamentally changed MedLink's trajectory. Beyond the immediate revenue, it provided extraordinary credibility in an industry where reputation and trust were paramount. Other hospitals began reaching out proactively, interested in the system that had won over such a prestigious institution. Our investors recognized the significance immediately. Jason from Horizon Ventures called within hours of the public announcement. "This changes everything," he said without preamble. "You've just leapfrogged from interesting startup to serious contender. We need to discuss your next funding round." The timing was perfect. Our initial funding was approaching depletion as we'd expanded the team to support our growing customer base. The Mass General contract provided the validation needed to attract significantly more capital at a much higher valuation. Within weeks, we closed a $12 million Series A round led by Horizon Ventures, with participation from 2 healthcare-focused investment firms. The funding allowed us to double our engineering team, establish a proper customer success department, and move to larger offices in downtown Portland. Growth brought new challenges, maintaining our culture as we rapidly expanded, establishing processes without becoming bureaucratic, balancing innovation with reliability. The intimate startup energy of our early days evolved into something more structured, but still fundamentally driven by our mission to transform healthcare technology. The implementation at Mass General demanded our absolute best. I personally relocated to Boston for the 3-month deployment period, working alongside our implementation team to ensure every detail met their exacting standards. The hospital's complexity dwarfed our previous implementations. More departmental workflows, more legacy systems requiring integration, more specialized clinical needs. Dr. Kwan maintained his skeptical oversight throughout the process, challenging every decision and scrutinizing every feature. His demanding approach ultimately strengthened our implementation by forcing us to justify each choice with clinical rationale rather than technical convenience. The pilot launch day arrived with tense anticipation. As physicians and nurses began Using MedLink for actual patient care in the 3 pilot departments, our team monitored every interaction, ready to address any issues immediately. The first hours passed with minor adjustments, but no significant problems. The system was performing as designed. By evening, a cautious optimism had emerged among both our team and the hospital staff. Dr. Reinhardt from Emergency Medicine sought me out as her shift ended. "It's working," she said simply. "I just managed a cardiac arrest case, and for once the software helped instead of getting in the way." Over the following weeks, usage data showed steadily increasing adoption rates and declining support requests as users became familiar with the system. Satisfaction surveys revealed significantly higher ratings than their previous system had achieved even after years of use. Most importantly, clinical outcome metrics showed promising improvements. Medication errors decreased, documentation completeness increased, and time to treatment in emergency situations shortened. 6 weeks into the pilot, Dr. Kwan called a meeting with our leadership team and the department heads from the pilot areas. I entered the conference room prepared for critique, knowing his standards for success would be extraordinarily high. "The data is compelling," he began, displaying slides that tracked various performance metrics before and after MedLink implementation. "User satisfaction has increased substantially, and our quality indicators are trending positively across all 3 departments." He turned to face me directly. "The committee is prepared to recommend expanding the implementation to 6 additional departments if these trends continue through the remainder of the pilot period." The expansion represented a major vote of confidence, moving from a contained pilot to a substantial portion of the hospital's operations. It was the outcome we had hoped for, but hadn't dared assume. "Thank you, Dr. Kwan," I responded. "We are committed to maintaining these results as we scale the implementation." He nodded, slightly. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Dr. Chen. I've seen countless technologies promise to revolutionize healthcare and then fail to deliver. Your system isn't perfect. No technology is. But it demonstrates a fundamental understanding of clinical work that others have lacked." Coming from him, this assessment carried particular weight. It validated not just MedLink's features, but its underlying philosophy. The truly effective healthcare technology required deep clinical insight, not just technical expertise. As the mass general implementation progressed successfully, interest from other major medical centers increased exponentially. Stanford Healthcare initiated discussions, Cleveland Clinic requested a demonstration, Mount Sinai began a formal evaluation process. MedLink had crossed the chasm from innovative startup to serious enterprise solution. Our team expanded to 70 people, including several physicians who joined as clinical workflow designers, bringing additional medical perspective to our development process. We established a formal clinical advisory board comprised of practicing doctors from various specialties to ensure MedLink continued evolving based on frontline needs rather than technical possibilities. The company's growth attracted attention beyond potential customers. Technology publications began covering our approach to healthcare software. Industry analysts included us in market assessments previously reserved for established vendors. Competitors started describing features as MedLink-like in their marketing materials. Most significantly, acquisition inquiries became regular occurrences. Every major healthcare technology company approached us with varying levels of interest. Some merely exploring, others making serious overtures. We politely deflected these conversations, focused on building MedLink as an independent company with a distinct mission. Then came the call that changed everything. I was reviewing design specifications for our upcoming oncology module when my assistant interrupted. "Daniel, there's someone from Apple on the line. They say it's regarding a potential strategic partnership." The request seemed so unexpected that I initially assumed it was a sales call related to enterprise device management. Apple, are you sure they're not just trying to sell us something? It's Sarah Martinez, Vice President of Strategic Healthcare Initiatives, she clarified. She said they've been following MedLink's progress and would like to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. I took the call with cautious curiosity. Apple had been gradually expanding their healthcare footprint, primarily through consumer-focused health tracking via Apple Watch and iPhone. Their interest in clinical systems was surprising, but not entirely implausible, given their growing focus on health technology. Dr. Chen, thank you for taking my call, Sarah began. I'll be direct. Apple has been observing MedLink's approach to healthcare software with significant interest. Your focus on user experience and clinical workflow aligns with our philosophy of technology that enhances rather than complicates human activities. That's gratifying to hear, I responded carefully. We've certainly been inspired by Apple's approach to user-centered design. We believe there could be meaningful synergies between Apple's healthcare initiatives and MedLink's clinical solutions, she continued. We'd like to explore those possibilities in person if you're open to the conversation. I agreed to a preliminary meeting, emphasizing that MedLink was focused on growing independently rather than pursuing acquisition. Sarah assured me they understood our position and were interested in exploring various forms of partnership. 2 weeks later, I found myself at Apple Park in Cupertino, the company's extraordinary circular headquarters that embodied their philosophy of elegant, human-centered design. The meeting included not just Sarah, but Apple's chief medical officer and their head of healthcare product development, a level of seniority that indicated serious interest rather than exploratory discussion. For 3 hours we discussed healthcare's technological challenges, MedLink's approach to clinical software, and Apple's vision for transforming the patient experience. The conversation felt less like a business negotiation and more like a meeting of aligned minds, shared frustration with healthcare's technological fragmentation, and common belief that thoughtful design could fundamentally improve both clinical and patient experiences. As the discussion progressed, their interest became clearer. Apple wasn't merely exploring partnership options. They were assessing MedLink as a potential acquisition, a centerpiece for their expanding healthcare strategy that would bring clinical depth to complement their consumer health platforms. We believe the future of healthcare technology requires seamless integration between consumer and clinical systems, Sarah explained. Patients managing chronic conditions through Apple devices, with that information flowing naturally into clinical systems like MedLink during hospital visits, physicians accessing patient-generated data that's actually useful rather than overwhelming. The vision was compelling, combining Apple's unparalleled user experience expertise and consumer reach with MedLink's clinical depth and growing hospital presence. It represented a potential transformation of healthcare technology that aligned perfectly with our mission of improving the experience for both providers and patients. As the meeting concluded, Sarah addressed the acquisition question directly. We understand your commitment to independence, and we respect that. But we'd like you to consider how MedLink's mission might be accelerated with Apple's resources behind it. We'd like to continue this conversation if you're willing. I left Cupertino with mixed emotions. Excitement about the possibilities such a partnership could create, but concern about maintaining MedLink's clinical focus and independence. Apple's resources could certainly accelerate our growth and impact, but acquisitions often resulted in the acquired company's vision being subsumed by the larger organization's priorities. Upon returning to Portland, I shared the discussion with our leadership team and board of directors. Opinions varied widely. Some saw tremendous opportunity in Apple's interest, while others worried about losing control of our destiny. The conversation wasn't theoretical. Apple had indicated they were prepared to make a formal offer if we expressed interest in pursuing the possibility. For several days, I wrestled with the decision. MedLink was growing successfully as an independent company, with increasing market share and improving financial metrics. An acquisition wasn't necessary for survival or even for continued growth. The question was whether joining Apple would amplify or diminish our impact on healthcare. I found myself thinking about why I'd left medicine to build MedLink in the first place, not for financial success or entrepreneurial achievement, but to transform how technology served clinical care. If that mission could be accomplished more effectively as part of Apple, did independence matter more than impact? After careful consideration and extensive discussions with our board and leadership team, I called Sarah to indicate we were open to hearing a formal proposal. Within days, Apple's corporate development team reached out to begin due diligence discussions, and 2 weeks later, Sarah and her team returned to Portland to present their offer in person. The terms were extraordinary: $38 million in cash, with additional performance-based incentives that could add another $12 million over 3 years. The entire MedLink team would join Apple's healthcare division with guaranteed positions for at least 2 years. Our technology would become central to Apple's clinical strategy, with significant resources dedicated to accelerating development and deployment. Beyond the financial terms, their vision for MedLink's future proved most compelling. Rather than absorbing our technology into existing products, they planned to establish a clinical solutions group led by our team, preserving our approach while providing the resources to scale it dramatically. The potential to influence healthcare, technology at Apple's scale, represented an opportunity far beyond what we could achieve independently, even with continued success. After negotiating specific terms regarding team continuity and product direction, we accepted the offer. MedLink would become part of Apple, bringing our clinical expertise to one of the world's most innovative technology companies. The agreement was finalized with signatures and handshakes in our Portland office, transforming our startup journey into something none of us had anticipated when we began. The news spread quickly through the technology and healthcare industries. Apple acquires healthcare startup MedLink in major clinical push, read the TechCrunch headline. Analysts speculated about Apple's broader healthcare strategy, with MedLink representing their most significant move yet into clinical systems rather than just consumer health tracking. Calls and messages poured in from colleagues, competitors, and former doubters, all recognizing the validation implicit in Apple's acquisition. Former investors congratulated us on the successful exit. Hospital administrators who had declined our earlier proposals suddenly expressed renewed interest. Even medical school classmates who had questioned my career change reached out with congratulations. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, still processing the day's events. 3 years after walking away from my medical residency against everyone's advice, I had built something valuable enough that Apple, one of the world's most selective and demanding companies, had paid millions to acquire it. The vindication was profound, not because of the money, but because of the validation of the vision that had driven me to take such a risk. With some hesitation, I picked up my phone to call my parents. My mother answered, and I asked if my father was home. "Yes, he's right here. Is everything okay, Daniel? You sound strange." "Everything's fine, Mom. Great, actually. Could you put the phone on speaker? I have some news." "Apple is acquiring MedLink," I said, the words still feeling surreal even as I spoke them. "The deal finalizes tomorrow." Silence filled the line for several heartbeats. "Apple?" my father finally asked. "The iPhone company." "Yes," I confirmed. "They want to integrate our software into their healthcare initiatives." I paused, gathering courage for the next part. The acquisition is for $38 million, plus potential additional payments based on performance. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost see my father processing this information, his expression shifting as the magnitude registered. 38 million, he repeated, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Our investors get their percentage, and the amount is split among the founding team, I clarified. But yes, it's real. My voice caught slightly as I continued. I didn't waste my education, Dad. I used it differently than you expected. My mother spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. We're so proud of you, Daniel. So proud. Then finally my father cleared his throat. I was wrong, he said, each word seemingly difficult to form. I didn't understand what you were building. I couldn't see it. From anyone else, this might have seemed insufficient. From my father, a man who had built his identity around certainty and authority, it was tantamount to a profound apology. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. Will you still be helping patients? He asked. The question revealing his core concern had always been about impact rather than prestige. More than ever, I assured him. Instead of hundreds of patients in one hospital, we'll potentially reach millions across thousands of hospitals. The paperwork was finalized the following day in a surprisingly understated meeting. Signatures exchanged across conference tables, handshakes with Apple executives, and just like that, MedLink became part of something much larger. The press release went out that afternoon, generating headlines across technology and healthcare publications. The team celebrated that evening at our favorite restaurant. Raj proposed an emotional toast to the crazy idea that actually worked. Lena added, and to the doctor who became a tech founder who's now part of Apple. I looked around at these people who had believed in MedLink when it was nothing but code on my laptop and sketches on napkins. To all of you who took a chance on this vision when most people thought it was foolish, this accomplishment belongs to everyone at this table. 2 weeks later, I flew home to visit my parents. The trip had been planned before the acquisition, a regular visit that now carried new significance. My father met me at the airport, his usual stoic expression softened somewhat. The flight was on time? He asked, taking my bag. Perfectly. On schedule, I replied. Falling into our familiar pattern of practical conversation, we drove in comfortable silence for several minutes before he spoke again. Your mother's planned quite a dinner, invited the neighbors, some family friends. Hope you don't mind. Not at all, I said, recognizing this for what it was. My parents' way of celebrating my success, of signaling their pride to their community. The Chang's son will be there, he continued, referencing family friends whose son had followed the traditional path through medical school to a prestigious surgical residency. He read about your company in the journal. Quite impressed. I smiled at the irony. For years, David Chang had been held up as the model of success I should emulate. Now my father was using his interest to validate my unconventional path. How does it feel? My father asked suddenly. Having your work recognized this way? The question surprised me with its directness. Validating, I answered honestly, but also strange. 3 years ago, I was just trying to solve problems that frustrated me as a resident. I never imagined it would lead here. He nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the most important contributions come from seeing problems others have accepted as inevitable. He glanced at me briefly. Your grandfather, my father, used to say, that. We arrived at my parents' home, where my mother waited on the porch. She embraced me with unrestrained joy, then held me at arm's length to study my face. You look tired but happy, she assessed. Both accurate, I admitted. That evening, our house filled with family, friends, and neighbors, all curious about Daniel's success story, as it was being called. My father surprised me by taking an active role in explaining MedLink to his colleagues, describing its clinical benefits with genuine understanding. Daniel identified fundamental flaws in how we interact with medical technology, he explained to his friend Dr. Wu. Instead of forcing physicians to adapt to poorly designed systems, he created software that follows clinical thinking patterns. Hearing my father articulate MedLink's value proposition with such clarity was surreal. He'd moved from skepticism to comprehension, perhaps even advocacy. Later, as guests were leaving, my father disappeared into his study, returning with a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "I found this recently," he said, handing it to me. "Thought you might want it." Inside was a faded photograph in a simple frame, me at 12 years old, standing proudly beside a science fair project display. The project had been a primitive computer program that used decision trees to suggest basic medical diagnoses based on symptoms. The ribbon pinned to the display read, "First place, your first medical software," my father said quietly. I'd forgotten about this until I saw the news about Apple. The memory flooded back, spending weeks coding that simple program on our family's first computer, my father quizzing me on the medical logic behind each decision branch, his rare smile when the judges awarded it first place. "You've been building toward this longer than either of us realized," he continued. "Perhaps your path was more consistent than I recognized." The acknowledgement brought unexpected emotion. My father hadn't just accepted my success. He'd found a way to see continuity in my choices, a through line that connected the studious child who had made him proud with the adult who had defied his expectations. The transition to Apple happened with surprising smoothness. Our team relocated to Cupertino, where we formed the core of Apple's new clinical systems division. The resources suddenly available to us were almost overwhelming. World-class designers, engineers with expertise in areas we'd struggled with, user research capabilities beyond anything we could have built independently. MedLink evolved rapidly under Apple's stewardship, maintaining its clinical foundation while gaining polish and integration capabilities we could never have achieved alone. Within 6 months, we launched at Stanford Medical Center, a deployment that would have taken our independent company a year to execute. My role shifted from startup CEO to division leader within Apple's healthcare group. The adjustment wasn't always easy. Navigating a large corporation required different skills than building a startup. But the mission remained consistent, creating technology that served medicine rather than burdening it. 1 year after the acquisition, I stood in an auditorium at Apple Park, preparing to demonstrate MedLink's newest capabilities at a healthcare conference. As attendees filled the seats, I noticed a familiar figure slipping in through a side door, my father taking a place in the back row. He hadn't mentioned coming, and I hadn't thought to invite him, assuming clinical technology demonstrations wouldn't interest him. Yet there he sat, attentive and focused, as I walked through MedLink's evolution and the outcomes it was achieving in hospitals across the country. After the presentation, as attendees networked over coffee, my father approached. "Impressive demonstration," he said. "The medication reconciliation feature is particularly elegant. You recognized that?" I asked, surprised by his grasp of the technical details. "I've been reading about your work," he admitted, trying to understand it better. He hesitated, then continued. "The hospital where I practice is actually considering implementing MedLink next quarter." The revelation stunned me. "You never mentioned that." "The committee just decided last week. I recused myself from the vote, of course." A small smile crossed his face, though I might have shared some observations about the system's clinical benefits. The image of my father advocating for MedLink to his colleagues, the same technology, he had once dismissed as a waste of education, felt like the closing of a circle. He hadn't just accepted my success, he had come to genuinely value the work itself. As we walked together through Apple Park's meticulously landscaped grounds, my father asked questions about future development plans, clinical outcomes data, and integration challenges. His inquiries were thoughtful and specific, reflecting genuine engagement rather than polite interest. "You know," he said as we paused beside the campus's central pond, "when you left your residency, I couldn't understand throwing away years of medical training for something so uncertain." I nodded, remembering his disappointment vividly. "What I failed to recognize," he continued, "was that you weren't abandoning medicine. You were approaching it from a different angle, one with potentially greater impact." "That's exactly what I was trying to explain back then," I said. He nodded. "Sometimes parents can only see the paths they recognize." He gazed across the water. "Your grandfather wanted me to take over his small grocery store in Chicago when I chose medicine. Instead, he didn't speak to me for months." This was a story I'd never heard, a parallel I hadn't known existed. What changed his mind? Time, success. Eventually, seeing that I could help people through medicine in ways I never could have through the family business. He turned to face me directly. "I should have remembered that lesson when you chose your own path." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, before he spoke again. "The work you're doing here matters, Daniel. It will help more patients than either of us could treat in multiple lifetimes of practice." From the man who had once called my startup a waste of education, this recognition represented the final validation, not of financial success or prestigious acquisition, but of purpose and impact. My father had come to understand what had driven me from the beginning, the desire to improve medicine just through a different avenue than he had imagined. As we walked back toward the main building, he asked about my upcoming projects with unexpected enthusiasm. We talked like colleagues with shared professional interests, rather than father and son with a complicated history. The conversation flowed easily, centered around improving patient care, the core value that had guided both our careers, despite the different forms they had taken. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.